Díobh agus fáilte go dtí rúla búla. Art Fight, my favourite time of the year. It's coming up soon, 1 month, and I cannot wait. I wanted to be a bit more prepared than I was last year, so I figured that while I'm doing all this prep, I might as well make a YouTube video out of it. It'd be fun, you know? I've only actually participated in Art Fight 1 year, the year before, which is Stardust vs Seafoam, but it was so much fun that I am so excited to do it again. Really, maybe a bit overeager if I'm being honest. If you don't know what Art Fight is, it's an art gifting game taking place annually in July. You participate by posting your Cs, and when the event starts, you draw others' characters to earn points for your team. The teams are different every year, and as of recording this, they haven't been released. But I rue the day they decided to get rid of comedy and tragedy as options for the theme vote. When I tell you, I was fuming after I learned that I couldn't have that opportunity. Anyway, if you want to know more about it, I recommend looking up the website. They have a whole list of the character rules, attack rules, and general site rules, as well as a guide for self-evaluation on the attacks you post so you can calculate how many points you get. I'd really recommend giving it a look-see yourself. I might make my own video solely focused on it in the future, but if you're itching to learn more, there's already a ton of videos on YouTube going through the rules in depth, plus some others on things like profile customization and sorting methods for your OCs. I'm vaguely aware that there was some drama last year around Art Fight thanks to it getting popular on TikTok, but I don't really use TikTok or most social media, and everyone I encountered was lovely. So really, my recommendation is don't use TikTok, or at least don't use it as your primary method of finding people. And I think you should have a fun time. I managed to get 31 attacks done, which is one for every day, which made me pretty proud. But the best thing about Art Fight is definitely the way it gives you a good opportunity to experiment and try out new techniques. I'll share my account at the end of the video, but if you're interested in Art Fight, I highly recommend giving it a shot. It's no hard commitment, you can make as much or as little art as you want, and if you drop me a follow, I'll try my best to attack you, if I can get through all my priority bookmarks. Anyway, onto my featured goober of the video, Amias. This I'm making his character sheet for Art Fight in the background, and you know, I love him, so I figured I'd talk about him. He is a human vampire and part of my world building project Pathera. He's 21 years old and grew up in a small port town called Sel in the country of Ternechia, which is right next to Thona, a country I mentioned last video. Last video is relevant again for the fact that Amias is actually from the same story as Devon. I didn't mention him because I felt like it would have taken a little bit away from the short snippet that Devon got, but he is actually the first person that was invited along to travel with the mysterious wandsman and fairy. Amias was born with albinism and pointy ears. Strange hair colours and pointed ears are usually early signs that one's baby has been born a sorcerer, and while it's not common for them to be born to non-magical parents, it's not unheard of in the slightest. His parents were thrilled. Having a sorcerer in the family would make their jobs as fishers so much easier, and it could bring in the family a lot more money. The only problem was that Amias wasn't a sorcerer. He just so happened to get some recessive genes in the genetic lottery, and his family realised they were thoroughly disappointed. Unfortunately, they didn't do a very good job at hiding that disappointment, and Amias grew up believing that he was unwanted without something to bring to the table. He tried to pick up witchcraft when he got a bit older, but he never seemed to be able to wrap his head around the concepts, and every failure just made him feel worse. During his time trying to learn magic, he spent a lot of time at the local library bonding with the librarian there. When he was 10, the library got a computer, and the librarian, knowing that Amias was looking for some way to feel useful, encouraged him to give it a try. When he actually got into the coding part of it, he fell in love with it, and he found himself basically living at the library just discovering how to code. His knowledge quickly surpassed what even the librarian knew, and when he was 16, began a club to teach people how to use computers. His family weren't too happy with his divided attention and wished he'd focus more on the business and not his club. They weren't too keen to encourage him either, thinking that his passion wasn't all that worthwhile. But he didn't care as much as he normally would have, far too distracted working towards a bright future for himself. When he was 20, a woman joined his club, and he found that they got on really well. After a while, she asked him out. He was thrilled. He's always been a bit of a social outcast, and this is the first time anyone had approached him and actually wanted to be in a relationship with him. Through his club, he'd gotten a good group of friends, he'd also found a passion, and he was now going to an academy for that passion. He had a partner, things were just going so well, and he was riding that high for as long as he possibly could. Eventually, everything came crashing down on his 21st birthday. 1 month before he was supposed to leave, his girlfriend revealed to him in the worst possible way that she was a vampire, and vanished from his life before he had the chance to realise what she'd done. Becoming a vampire is an extremely tolling process, pushing the body to its limit. Fledglings will often be left in a coma shortly after infection and will wake up, should they survive, absolutely starving. Without sufficient preparation beforehand, someone will usually die. Amias was not one of the lucky ones, and he'd killed one of his parents when he woke up, too lost in a haze to even realise what he was doing. He was abandoned, kicked out before he was even fully conscious. The people in the town wanted his head, a vicious vampire who wasn't even awake a moment before killing someone. He was no longer a burden, but a monster. Amias tried to turn to the librarian who had looked out for him all those years. The librarian, though terrified, was educated enough in vampirism to understand what had happened and tried to give him shelter. Unfortunately, their relationship was very common knowledge, and the people immediately assumed that's where Amias was hiding. When the librarian didn't back down, they set the library on fire, hoping that Amias would either die inside or be forced out. And forced out he was. He climbed through a hidden back entrance, narrowly avoiding getting caught, and he ran into the cover of the trees. Bullet shots were ringing out in the distance behind him. Against his best interests, he continued to stick around Cell. He didn't know how to get by on his own and knew that there was available food from the livestock there. Plus, he needed closure on what happened to the librarian. One late evening, while he was getting up early for some food, he noticed a wagon being led by what looked like a unicorn pulling into town. Listening in, he found that it was a wandsman, a travelling magic merchant usually specialising in wand crafting, and that people were pleading with him to deal with the monster that had been killing their livestock and hurting their livelihoods. Amias figured that if they were getting a skilled magic user on the hunt for him, then sticking around any longer would be pointless, that no matter what he did, either way he would likely die, and his heart sank when he saw the wandsman nod his head in agreement to their pleas. He made a plan. Now or never, he would spend this last night finishing everything he needed to do. When the sun set, he snuck into his old room, untouched by the carpet and bed sheets that were disposed of. He could still smell the blood lingering in the stale air. He took what little valuable items he had in there before leaving, never looking back. Next, he went to the holding cells, figuring that was likely where they'd put the librarian, if he was alive at all. He still had to sneak past the guards, but it was worth it when he turned the corner to the cells and saw the librarian, alive. They talked. Amias apologised, but he was reassured that it wasn't his fault. The librarian made him promise that he would leave before dawn to find somewhere he could be accepted, and that he would fight to live. He left the cells teary-eyed and shaken, and was noticed by the guards upon his exit, who swiftly leaped into action, alerting the wandsman to what was happening. Amias, in a panic and wanting desperately to fulfill his promise, had forgone any previous plans and taken off in a sprint. He was tired though, and he hadn't been eating what his body now craved. It slowed him, and eventually he tumbled to his knees, unable to run any further. He could hear the yelling voices in the distance grow closer, could smell the gunpowder, and no matter how much he tried to take calming breaths, his chest felt empty and the task futile. He wanted to run, but what was the point? He would just be alone, living on borrowed time, if he could even call what he is now alive. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft ringing of a bell close to his ear, a strange sound considering the circumstance. He opened his eyes just in time to see himself being engulfed in a flurry of bright golden light that strained his eyes. When it faded, he couldn't hear any yelling anymore, and he looked around to realise he was in a small room. The ringing ball of light danced in front of him gently. A fairy, he realised to his horror. He had been kidnapped. There were footsteps outside, and the room shook slightly as something climbed onto it. A shutter opened on one end, and the fairy dashed towards it. Amias followed the trail left behind to find a head sticking through. The wandsman, Before Amias could question anything, the wandsman explained that he wasn't going to hurt him and that he was taking him out of the town for his own safety. He should stay quiet until they're far enough away. Amias couldn't help calling out to the wandsman, asking him to help the librarian too. Parshman wondered why anyone would help him at all, let alone over someone so kind. The wandsman smiled and reassured Amias that the librarian had gotten out already, and that all they had to do was quietly leave during the commotion before anyone suspected a thing. Amias, feeling like he didn't really have an alternative, agreed. When they'd gotten far enough away, just as the sun was beginning to peak beyond the horizon, the wandsman stopped the wagon and explained everything that had happened to Amias. He offered Amias the option to continue travelling with him if he'd like, promising that even though he travelled with a fairy, he was not one to take names or demand favours. The only thing he'd ask in return was for the companionship. Amias was shocked at the offer. Part of him was worried that the wandsman was getting more out of this than he let on, and that if Amias proved to be a burden, he might be discarded. In the end, though, he agreed to it, figuring that if he was going to make good on his promise, he couldn't do it without help. Now, I know that was a very dramatic backstory, but I cannot emphasize enough how dangerous people think vampires are in this world. There is literally only one country that openly accepts and embraces them. Just one. They are either hunted or barely tolerated in the rest of the world. Anywho, since I have a bit more time in this video compared to the last one, I'll talk about Amias' names and also how names tend to work in Pethera, at least in this part of the world. Last video I mentioned that there's a family name, a given name, and a third name, the chosen name. I also mentioned that the further west you go, the more names a person tends to have. Amias lives in the westernmost continent, Kados, which has a tradition of giving children as many names as possible in order to protect them from a fairy that likes stealing it and dooming them to eternal servitude. You see, names hold power. Owning a name is ownership over oneself, and to give that up or have it stolen can completely rid one of their autonomy. Fairy are tricky and value power, and throughout history they have been known to steal names of other species. With Driox, magical hotspots that they thrive in, being most common in Kados, it was of the utmost importance to protect oneself, and so certain naming traditions spawned. A family name is considered a name shared among several people, and thus a name that no one person owns, making it very, very difficult to steal. Children are referred to exclusively by their family name up until they reach a certain age, which varies from country to country. Once they are considered old enough, they have a naming ceremony where a child gets given a few names by their family and the child picks one for themselves. The chosen name is normally used for everyday life, and the given names are kept as secret as possible so that they may not be taken. Amias' full name is Amias Mabry Ambrose Marin. Marin is just for mariner of the sea. It's a family name, you know? Mabry truthfully was picked because it sounded nice. The most common meaning is Mud Hill, but there's a couple of other interpretations out there. It also sounded similar to Mabel, which is a name that would have suited him and one I would have picked if it weren't for the fact that Mabel is typically a feminine name and I didn't want to cause confusion. Ambrose has actual lore relevance as a name though. It's linked to the Fae food ambrosia, and it's thought that giving your child this name will offer extra protection, as the Fae will get so absorbed in thinking of a good meal that they will not notice you leaving. Others say that if you give this name to someone, then the Fae might be more inclined to take it over the one's chosen name. The name itself means immortal. Amias, his chosen name, means loved. Interpret that how you will. Fun fact, Amias and Mabel are actually derived from the same word, amabilis, which means lovable or worthy of love, which was partly why Mabel was even up for consideration. Also, Amias only recently got his name while I was making this video. He has been an OC of mine for 6-7 years now, and the entire time I have just been calling him Vampire. I haven't even gone through all my notes to rename him. Now, he's not the only OC who's had this problem, but that's a conversation for another time. By this point, I'm nearly done, and I'm starting on a little doodle down to the right. I have no time to give you the lore behind it, but that is called a Thonin Sorcerer Robe, and I'll put the updated version on the screen with my darling dearest other OC Poppy modelling it. Anyway, I cannot wait for Artfight. The themes this year seem pretty promising. There's not really any of them I wouldn't mind, even if I would have at least liked the option to vote for comedy and tragedy. Here's my account, Existential Crisis 247. Why isn't it Rula Bula, you ask? Great question. That's for me to know, and you should probably find out by checking my profile. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Slán go fóill.